A user asked me, what caused our education systems to fail us so badly in these recent decades? Why is so much of our population proudly ignorant or even illiterate? The question needs answering, and we're going to do a deep dive today to explain why or if U.S. education is struggling. Hi, I'm Teddy Ebby, and today we're going to be doing that deep analysis of the U.S. education system. Let me start off by saying I am not a professional educator. It takes a lot to be a teacher, and though I've been interested in the past, I'm still not sure I could hack it. However, I did live with two professional educators for over a decade, and they gave me their thoughts in addition to the research that I did within this video. Oh yeah, and here's my master's in public administration and my bachelor's in political science. A big issue with evaluating this topic is how we judge failure. After all, one person's view of what failure is when it comes to educational hot takes could well be seen as someone else's success. So, today I'm going to go over 6 major policy problems that the U.S. education system has experienced within the past 2.5 decades, and then rank them by whether they're getting better, it's complicated, or objectively failing. With some hot takes sprinkled in, let's take a nuanced look at the U.S. education system. Alright, topic number 1, weak life skills instruction. In the past 25 years, it has become obvious that there's a mismatch between what's taught in academia and real-life knowledge.
I was never taught what laws there are. I was never taught what laws there are. Let me repeat, I was not taught the laws for the country I live in, but I know how Henry VIII killed his women. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Glad that's in my head instead of financial advice.
While nobody argues that traditional academics don't provide a good base for knowledge to be built upon, it's become obvious that U.S. students lack instruction in important civics and practical knowledge. For example, surveys find that only 13% of Americans, including adults, can say when the Constitution was ratified, and only 1 in 5 under 45 Americans could pass a basic citizenship quiz. The fact that K-12 curriculum often skims over civics in favor of STEM instead of integrating the two alongside each other has been a big problem. Because many schools don't teach financial literacy, digital literacy, or even media literacy, many graduates are unprepared for adult life and the information economy. The result is a population that can appear proudly ignorant of basic facts. They've graduated and learned what we asked them to, but when the curriculum covers the Pythagorean theorem more than the practical ways to do your taxes, this is a policy failure of epic proportions.
Do you know how many continents there are?
No.
Whether or not this is actually the case, the perception of the public is a mismatch between the subjects that are taught in schools and the importance of them in the real world. For instance, driver's education still isn't a standard offering in most schools. Reporting indicates that while driver's ed was common up through the early 2000s, it has since been discontinued in public schools in multiple states. This has been forcing families to pay out of pocket for private driving lessons, sometimes totaling up to hundreds of dollars, which creates a gap with families who can and cannot pay for this extra education. Demand for this education is clear, but coverage is still weak. Teen drivers aged 16 to 19 make up just 3% of all the licensed drivers on the road, but they account for almost 8.7% of all drivers within crashes and 6.5% in fatal crashes, nearly double their share of the driving population. It's hard to argue that increased availability to better motor vehicle education wouldn't do a lot of good for the number of accidents among young drivers. But still, this form of schooling isn't prioritized and, well, the result is clear. So we're starting off strong with our first objective failure. But that is attenuated by the fact that it is getting better. Most states do require some sort of physics education, though the requirements and standards vary widely from state to state. Here's my first hot take. Schools should embrace the use of artificial intelligence. I'm a young millennial in my late 20s, on the verge of being a Gen Z, and if YouTube's analytics are to be believed, many of you are too, or at least in that same general age range. Do you remember being told the importance of certain kinds of math techniques, and that when you graduate you're not going to be carrying around a calculator everywhere you go, and so you need to know the a squared plus b squared equals c squared, blah 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 blah. Fast forward to the era of the smartphone, and will you look at that? We all have calculators in our pockets all the time. Like it or not, it looks like AI is here to stay. Some of today's kindergartners will graduate and their first job might be as a ChatGPT prompt engineer or an AI machine learning specialist or technician. The education system needs to be at the forefront of modern technology or risk being looked at as outdated and unnecessary, just like it did when it comes to the whole calculator nonsense. Topic number 2, chronic underfunding. Public K-12 funding comes largely from state and local taxes. In practice, many school budgets are still lagging far beyond their needs. For example, analysts estimate that America still underfunds the public education system by nearly $150 billion a year. During the 2008 recession, many states cut education benefits from their budgets, and funding never fully recovered. I still remember being in middle school and watching my favorite teacher, Mr. Harrington, lose his job and being sad about it, but only realizing later that almost 33% of my entire school staff was being laid off or put on part-time as well because of these massive budget cuts. So we can see that policy has struggled to bounce back after shocks to the system. For example, during that same 2008 to 2012 recession, roughly 100,000 teaching positions were cut. By 2021 to 2022, the teacher workforce still hadn't recovered to pre-recession levels, and then the budgets got hit again by COVID. So there are these communities that have never recovered their capacity that they lost during hard times despite later having budgetary prosperity. Frequent swings in funding creates instability. This kind of boom and bust funding model is a failure of policy design, educational policy design specifically. Schools need consistent resources and staffing to produce their best product. But budgets are often tightened during a crisis and then not expanded very quickly afterwards. Systemic problems can outlast the crisis that creates them. For instance, research finds that each $1,000 reduction per student spending can widen achievement gaps by several points on standardized testing. In short, poor and minority districts typically get less money and worse facilities, directly limiting these resources. That's not new, but it also leads into an increasing class size and support services and teacher quality going in the toilet during these crises, and a continuation of these funding deficits long after the event. Now, you might be asking yourself, 2008, that was nearly 2 decades ago. Why does that matter now? Here's where my MPA really comes in handy. This is a perfect example of a term that we use in public administration called implementation lag. It's where often the effects of a public policy take a long time to be felt after the initial implementation. Today, roughly half of all U.S. students qualify as low income. Achievement data shows that these poorer students perform far worse on average, and in fact, studies show across states, education funding cuts during the Great Recession widened achievement gaps for those communities. So to make a long story short, the negative impacts of the Great Recession on the funding of U.S. education are rearing their ugly heads now as opposed to immediately after the Great Recession due to that delay in the effect of the budget cuts. Likewise, the recovery is going to be slow from these effects that we're just seeing now. So the data doesn't lie, and we have on our hands another policy objective fail. It isn't getting better, and it won't get any better until the U.S. gets back on track with its educational funding goals. Now it's time for my second hot take. Quality education is expensive. Get over it. So many people complain, uninformedly mind you, that the necessary funding for primary education is already too much. Older folks complain that they don't have kids anymore and they shouldn't have to pay school taxes. I'm telling you right now, you're blind to the knock-on effects of good public education. That kid who you're voting to receive $1,000 less a year in money for invested in their education could be your heart surgeon tomorrow. And the burden that taxpayers bear is spread out, and so it becomes negligible. I know that I would gladly pay a couple dollars more a year if it meant the children in my area got a better education, and I don't even have kids. Topic number 3, an overemphasis on standardized testing. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Since 2001's No Child Left Behind Act, the U.S. education policy has leaned heavily on annual standardized testing. Critics warn that this has led schools to teach to the test, narrowing curriculum to math and reading at the expense of arts, history, and even critical thinking. Many teachers report cutting back on non-tested subjects and even field trips and other educational initiatives so that students hit those math and reading targets. There is strong evidence that regular unrestricted play, physical activity, and arts education can improve attention, which is really needed right now, behavior, and even other academic outcomes. Yes, states that scaled back recess or music often saw short-term bumps in test prep time, but at the cost of student engagement, mental health, and long-term learning. So, short-term gain, long-term fail. Tests like the PSSA, SBAC, and SAT provide data for certain skills, but they miss creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, etc. The NCLB, No Child Left Behind, is representative of another public administration term, an unfunded mandate. It required state and local governments to perform actions without the necessary funding to cover the costs. Last time it was examined, the law was under-budgeted by $10 billion. Debates over accountability versus flexibility still continue. In short, policy-driven testing pressures have created real distortions in teaching and curriculum. So, pass, fail? The verdict is complicated. It's difficult to measure the negative impacts of overstandardization, but it's easy to highlight the benefits. As with too many things, more data, more studies, and more time to examine the impacts is needed. Here's the next hot take. Standardization is stupid.
That's not the way you're supposed to do it, Dad. They want us to do it this
I don't
way.
know that way. Why would they change math? Math is
it's
math.
okay,
Math
Dad.
is math.
This is my thoughts without any of the data. I know it's important for children to learn through a standardized process. However, not everyone learns the same. When it comes down to it, it's the result that counts. Stifling creativity in problem solving and putting adults who learned differently on the back foot when helping their children is not a good path forward for education. I don't think I need to say any more on it. Topic 4. Teacher labor crisis, specifically pay and staffing. Teacher pay has stagnated for decades, even before our most recent bout of inflation. A 2023 report found that U.S. teachers only earn about 74 cents for every dollar that similar college-educated professionals make. That's nearly 26.4% lower than wages for their similar degree worker counterparts. Low and flat salaries have made teaching as a career not only less attractive, but less viable, fueling these shortages of teachers throughout the United States. Data shows that 86% of U.S. schools reported difficulties hiring teachers in 2023. Special education and science teachers are some of the most difficult positions to fill. Many schools report that they have then resorted to relying on substitutes or undercertified staff, further undermining the quality of public education. Teacher morale has also suffered because of massive class sizes and threats of political intervention in the classroom. The underinvestment in educators as a workforce is chronic. Low pay, high stress has created high turnover in your employee base, showing that this policy or all the policies surrounding it are objective fails. And with the current government's budget cuts to the Department of Education, there are no signs of this issue getting better anytime soon. Here's another hot take. Teachers don't get summers off. This is mind-boggling to me. Why don't you try not working for 3 months out of the year and see how your finances look? Most of the old guard teachers may have been able to take those whole summer breaks off, but because of the pay crisis that I just described, many of today's educators are working seasonal or summer jobs just to make ends meet until the school year begins. The summers off myth overlooks the unpaid work that teachers do, designing curriculum, attending trainings, and meeting with students and families during school breaks. Topic number 5. Overemphasis on college degrees. In the last quarter century, America has pushed the narrative that everyone needs a college degree, swelling college enrollment. But this has had its downsides because so many people now hold bachelor's degrees that the degrees themselves no longer represent guarantees of strong skills.
Everyone can be superheroes. Everyone can be super. And when everyone's super, no one will be.
A U.S. Department of Education survey found that fewer than 1/3 of college graduates scored proficient in literacy, and many couldn't handle simple real-life documentation. Not only that, but some of the degrees that got pushed carry low labor market returns, and student debt is a serious concern. Yes, on average, bachelor's degree holders earn substantially more over the longer period of their lifetimes than high school graduates. But rising tuition has kind of outpaced that wage growth, and it's led to many low-return majors. Meanwhile, career and technical programs have been sorely neglected, and many industries now report shortages of skilled tradespeople. The college for all mentality has created an oversupply of underemployed graduates with debt, while leaving too few well-trained tradespeople. This policy imbalance dilutes educational returns and contributes to public frustration, so this is another objective policy fail. But we've got some good news that's tinged with some honest-to-God misfortune. Trade school enrollment is booming, with a 6.6 per year projected growth from now through 2030. There was a 10.5% net increase in new enrollments from 2020 to 2023, and vocational programs now enroll over 1 million students in the United States every year, a 16% jump from 2022 to 2023 alone. The bad news is that college enrollment has fallen off a cliff in the past couple of years. Between 2020 and 2025, roughly 80 private nonprofit colleges have closed or merged, with about 40 unique closures in 2023 to 2024 alone. Smaller and financially weaker colleges continue to shutter at a steady clip. While this is a worsening sign for institutional diversity and local access, it does indicate a slowdown in the number of degrees being awarded. So hopefully the labor market will soon find an equilibrium once more. So perhaps we can hit this topic with improving stamp as well. My next hot take is that college is not for everyone. You've probably heard this one before, but I firmly agree with it. And I agree with that opinion for many reasons. There are plenty of people who thrived in the structured learning of primary school only to fall flat when it came to motivating themselves in college. Not only that, but you should not, I repeat, should not take on the mountains of debt that come along with a college degree if the subject area that you're going into isn't something that you're reasonably sure that you want to pursue. Every day, you probably hear people at your workplace talking about how they're working but not using their degree. There's a reason for that. Final topic, 6. School safety issues. It's no secret. For the past 2 decades, there has been a growing sense of insecurity and distraction in schools. Reports show that 19% of students ages 12 through 18 report being bullied in the 2021 to 2022 school years. Separately, mass shootings and campus violence have deeply shaken public confidence in the school system and the safety thereof. One recent poll found that over half of teens were worried about school shootings. Additionally, schools often lack enough support staff like counselors and nurses. The issues of bullying, fear, and increased stress has dramatically undermined learning, not to mention eroded the social fabric of schools, which infects graduates and their views about what behavior is acceptable in the wider world. Far too many students attend school in an atmosphere of fear or anxiety, which is a direct result of policy shortcomings. However, at least in the realm of school shootings and violence, there has been a lot of progress lately. Bullying rates have declined over the past decade from near 28% of students reporting bullying in 2010 to 2011 to 19% in 2021 through 2022. As for security infrastructure, 97% of schools now use some sort of controlled entry system, 93% use cameras, and anonymous threat reporting, 65% of schools. Finally, about 58% of schools had at least one SRO, school research officer, on campus weekly as of 2023. So, even though more can definitely be done on the policy side to ensure safety in schools, most of the policies that directly affect this are out of the hands of the Department of Education. This one is thoroughly complicated. Here's my last hot take. Schools give bullies way too much leeway. I don't care if I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here, but schools let bullies get away with murder. Bad joke, but still. The micro-society of schools is the first experience most kids have with cooperation and people skills that eventually become necessary for their existence in wider society.
I'm afraid of these feelings and what they might mean. It's like because I hate myself so much, I gotta point that hate outward towards you.
You understand this on such a deep level that I don't understand.
Now I'm gonna punish you physically for acknowledging my emotional problem.
Bullies, class clowns, and the like are given way too much leeway, and graduates leave school thinking that there won't be any consequences for their actions in the wider world. This directly contributes to a society whose younger members are graduating and are getting a rude awakening about the expectations of society, whether they deserve it or not. Yes, discipline has indeed shifted towards restorative practices and positive behavior modification rather than zero tolerance, kicking kids out of schools, which, in moderation, is a very good thing. Schools recognized that harsh punishments often backfire. However, showing young adults that, oh yes, there are consequences and accountability does exist and you better shape up is something that we need to do better with on a policy side of things. So let's break this down by the data. Internationally, America is neither the worst nor the best. For example, the OECD's PISA exam, basically 15-year-olds' scores in reading, math, and science, placed the U.S. roughly in the middle of developed countries in 2015. We are 38th in math, in science out of 71 countries, and the U.S. scores have been nearly flat for decades. So these results show a slow stagnation of U.S. education quality, not any sort of sudden collapse. These declining test scores are real data points, not just anecdotes. NAEP, the federally run report card of U.S. education, similarly shows mixed signals. After years of gradual improvement, U.S. math scores seemed to plateau. 4th and 8th grade math peaked in the 2010s and fell back in 2015. However, it is important to note Another positive, high school graduation rates have risen, climbing from 79% in 2010 to about 87% in the 2019 to 2020 school year. So, in conclusion, it's all about nuance. Public discourse often oversimplifies big policy things like this. It seems like a failure because high-profile gaps and test declines grab headlines. But if education had totally collapsed, we'd see massive, across-the-board deterioration, which we just don't. Instead, we have this complex mix, average or slightly declining test scores, offset by graduation attainment and other successes. Many of the failures listed above are well-known challenges that policymakers have been trying to address for decades. It's unfortunately not as easy as pulling a lever or throwing some money at the problem and fixing everything. Everybody disagrees a little or even a lot about the best way to fix things with U.S. education policy. So, yeah, the U.S. education system is not as a whole broken, but it has serious flaws, 6 of which I just spoke about. The evidence shows genuine policy shortcomings with real consequences. At the same time, broader indicators have improved. And discussions must acknowledge that kind of nuance. Yes, there are critical failures to fix, but it only seems to fail if we ignore the successes and any context. Careful and determined reform, not despair, is the answer. I have way more hot takes about the US education system that isn't backed by policy data, and more gut feelings with that less raw data, but this video is already way too long. If you want me to make a separate video about those, comment below. This has been a nuanced look. I'm Teddy Ebby, and I'll see you next time.